This week's lecture is going to be the cardiovascular system and the structure of the heart. So first, let's talk about the components of the cardiovascular system. So the cardiovascular system is actually made up of the cardiovascular system and the circulatory system. The cardiovascular system is the heart and blood vessels. Cardio means heart, and vascular or vasculature is your blood vessels. So the circulatory system is anything that circulates blood through the body. So that would be the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. So blood is part of the circulatory system, not the cardiovascular system.
The position of the heart. So the heart is located in the chest, between the lungs, and behind the sternum. The sternum is your chest bone, right? So the top of the heart is called the base. That's the wider part of the heart when you're talking about like left to right width. The bottom of your heart that tilts towards the left side is called the apex of your heart. This is an important area because when you're listening to the heart with a stethoscope, you always want to aim for the apex. It's where you're going to get the best heart sounds from, the apex. In adults, the heart weighs about 10 ounces and it's about 3.5 inches wide and about 5 inches tall from base to apex. At any age, a healthy heart should be about the size of a person's fist. So a baby's heart is the size of their fist, a kid's heart is the size of their fist, and your heart should be about the size of your fist. There are some conditions that cause the heart to be larger than it should be, but healthy, normal hearts are about the size of your fist. Outside of the heart. So outside the heart is this double-walled membrane that surrounds the heart and protects it. So the membrane resembles like a semi-deflated balloon that you would push your fist in, and it kind of would wrap around your fist and make a double-walled membrane. So that's kind of what the outside of the heart looks like, that membrane. Just imagine you smash your fist into a balloon and it wraps around it. It still has two walls, but there's an open space inside. And in the balloon, the open space would be air, but around the heart, the open space is actually filled with fluid. The peris of the heart. So the prefix peri means around. So anything that starts with peri is going to be something that goes around something. The next part of the word is going to be a root word, and it'll tell you what it's talking about. So that membrane we just talked about that goes around the heart is called the pericardium, meaning around the heart. So it's a double-walled sac that encloses the heart and it protects it. It allows it to beat without friction because it's fluid-filled. The fluid reduces friction. And it also allows the heart to expand, but only so much. It doesn't allow it to excessively expand. Okay, this layer, or this double-walled membrane, these layers are anchored to the diaphragm inferiorly and the sternum anteriorly. So on the bottom of the heart, this membrane is anchored to the diaphragm, which is the muscle under our ribs that we use to breathe. And then the front of it is anchored to the backside of your sternum or your chest bone. So because this thing is double-walled, it has two walls, and each wall has two sides, an inside and an outside. The first layer is the fibrous pericardium. This is the outside-most layer. Okay, below that is this cavity that's open. Okay, that's called the pericardial cavity, and it's filled with pericardial fluid, meaning fluid around the heart, right? And then cavity around the heart. Next layer down is the serous pericardium. The side of that wall that touches the fluid, the pericardial fluid, is the parietal layer. The other side touches the actual heart. That's the visceral layer. Okay, so the serous pericardium has two sides, the visceral and the parietal. Visceral touches the heart, parietal is the other side of that wall. The fibrous pericardium, even though it is two-sided, it only has one name, just fibrous pericardium. And that does not touch the heart. The only part that touches the heart is the visceral pericardium. If you get an inflammation in any of these membranes, it's called pericarditis. Okay, the suffix itis means inflammation of. So pericarditis is inflammation of the pericardium. So after we get through the pericardium, we actually get to the heart itself. Okay, the heart wall has three layers. It has the epicardium, which is the outermost, the myocardium, which is the middle and thickest layer, and the endocardium, which is the innermost layer. Okay, and if you look at the names of them, it'll kind of tell you where they're at. So epicardium means like on top of or outside of the heart. Myocardium means muscle of heart. And endocardium means inside of heart. So the first layer, as we're going down into the heart, is the epicardium. This is the outermost layer of the heart wall. It actually is the same thing as the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. So that layer that touches the heart is the epicardium or visceral layer of the pericardium. They're the same thing. So this covers the heart directly. It has some areas of thick adipose tissue, so thick fat tissues in some places, and this is where the coronary blood vessels flow through. And we will talk about those in a few minutes, what the coronary vessels are. But this is the epicardium, or the outermost layer of the heart wall. As we work our way down into the heart, the next layer is the myocardium, and this layer is composed of cardiac muscle. So this muscle spirals around the heart and allows it to produce like a ringing motion if you were wringing out a towel. It makes up the vortex of the heart. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. That's the only place in the body you find cardiac muscle. The way it looks is it has striations with branches, and it's single nucleated, meaning one nucleus per cell. And if you look at this picture on the top right, that shows you how it kind of looks like strings, but it has little branches coming off those strings. They're not perfectly straight as like skeletal muscle would be. And one nucleus. They only have one nucleus per cell. They're not multinucleated. The myocardium provides structural support and attachment locations for the valves, and it also plays a role in electrical conductivity of the heart, which is really important for maintaining the heart's rhythm and allowing the heart to actually contract. It's really important. But this is the thickest layer of the heart, and it's made up of heart muscle or cardiac muscle. The next layer, or the deepest most layer, is the endocardium. This is the inside layer, and this is the layer that actually lines the chambers of the heart and your blood vessels. This is the layer that the blood actually touches when it's in the heart and the blood vessels. It's continuous through the heart and the arteries and veins. So into the heart now. When we look inside the heart clearly has 4 chambers. Okay, it has 2 top and 2 bottom. The 2 top chambers are called atria, or the right and left atrium. Okay, these are on top, and they are filling chambers. These chambers receive blood from the body or the lungs. These are filling chambers. They do not contract, they just fill with blood. Okay, below them you have your ventricles, the right and left ventricle. These are the pumping chambers. These are the actual chambers that squeeze or contract and push blood out of the heart. They pump blood out of the heart through arteries. So on top you have atria, on bottom you have ventricles. We have a right and a left side of the heart. And why is this important? Well, they have different jobs entirely. Okay, so the right side of the heart is part of the pulmonary circuit. And pulmonary means lungs. So the right side focuses on getting blood to the lungs. Okay, the left side is part of the systemic circuit, meaning whole body. Okay, so the left side focuses on getting blood to the body. So this is kind of how it works. You get deoxygenated blood from the body into your right atrium. It then flows down to the right ventricle, and it's pushed out through the pulmonary artery and goes to the lungs. This blood is deoxygenated, so it needs to go pick up oxygen. The only place it can get oxygen is the lungs, so it has to go to the lungs. Once it goes to the lungs, it picks it up, and then it returns back to the heart through the veins. Now it's oxygenated. It's going to go into the left atrium, which will then fill down to the left ventricle, and that will contract and squeeze blood through the aorta out to the whole body. Okay, the blood will go through the body, drop off oxygen, and then come back to the heart into the right atrium. Okay, remember the right side of the heart focuses on getting oxygen, pulmonary circuit. It only deals with deoxygenated blood. It does not have oxygen, so it needs to focus on getting it. The left side only has oxygenated blood in it. Okay, so any blood in the right side is going to be deoxygenated, and any blood in the left side is always going to be oxygenated. And they're usually depicted by the colors blue and red. Blue means deoxygenated, and red means it's highly oxygenated, and it's ready to go give oxygen to the tissues. Another feature of the heart are the sulci. So the sulci are these little indentions in the outside or the exterior of the heart that separate certain parts of the heart from each other. So if you look on this diagram of the heart, you can see the purple top and the blue bottom. There's clearly a indention that separates the top from the bottom. That's the coronary sulcus. Okay, that separates the atria from the ventricles. if you look running down the middle of the heart, there's another sulcus. That's the interventricular sulcus, meaning it runs between the ventricles, separating the right from the left ventricle. The sulci also are important because this is where the coronary vessels lie. You will find the blood flow to the heart to be in these little indentions. Okay, so you have the coronary sulcus going top to bottom, separating it, and then the interventricular running between the ventricles going down the middle of the heart. The sulci separate the heart exteriorly, but there are septums that divide the heart up interiorly, on the inside. Okay, so you have interatrial septums. And if you look at the name, interatrial, it tells you it's between the atria, right? So you have the interatrial septum, which separates the right and left atrium from each other. It distinguishes those chambers. And then you have interventricular septums that separate the right and left ventricle from each other. They give it clear, distinct right and left chambers. In the ventricles, you have these things called trabeculae carneae. These are ridges that give some texture to the ventricles, so when they squeeze, they don't suction, the walls don't suction together. If you think about a suction cup, it's usually nice and smooth, and they usually suction very well to smooth surfaces. So giving some ridges to a surface will prevent it from suctioning. And when the heart contracts, we do not want the walls of the ventricles sticking together. So that's what those are for. They just prevent the sticking of the walls during contraction, especially because all that does, those ventricles, is contract continuously over and over again. So we know there's 4 chambers in the heart, and blood flows from the atria into the ventricle, and then from the ventricles into arteries, and then it goes to the body, right? So if I were to pick you up and flip you over, would your blood flow backwards? The answer is no, because we have these nice little things called valves that make sure blood only flows one direction. It's really important because we do not need blood backflowing through the heart. We need it to keep going the way it's supposed to go. So you have 2 different types of valves in your heart. You have AV valves. Let's talk about these first. These are atrioventricular valves. So the name will tell you it's between the atria and the ventricles. So the atria fill. These are your filling chambers, right? The top of the heart. They fill up. And then the blood flows down through the AV valve into the ventricle. Okay? When the ventricle contracts, what's keeping the blood from going back up into the atria? These valves. These valves close. So if you have blood in the atria and it's pushing on the AV valves, the valves open because they are made to open when they're pushed from the correct direction. So if blood's sitting on the valves, pushing downward on them, they open right up. Okay? The blood flows down into the ventricles. If you push up on those valves from the ventricles, they will close. So when the ventricles contract and the blood pushes upward, they cannot go back up into the atria because the AV valves are closed, and especially if you push on them from underneath, it's just going to close tighter. Okay, so that keeps the blood going one direction. On the right side of the heart, you have a 3-cusped valve. It's called the tricuspid, meaning 3 cusps. On the left side of the heart, you have a 2-cusped valve called the bicuspid valve. It's also referred to as the mitral valve. It's interchangeably called that, so make sure you know it by both names. You can have times where blood does come back up to these valves. The valves can prolapse, meaning that they kind of like bulge in the wrong direction and they don't close tightly. The one that commonly does this is the mitral valve, and it's caused by strep throat. So strep throat can commonly cause mitral valve prolapse, where you have a little bit of blood regurgitating up from the left ventricle back into the left atria. A tiny amount usually doesn't cause issues. You can hear it when you listen to the heart. It doesn't cause issues if it's a small amount, but if it gets significant, it can cause complications, and you usually do surgery to correct it. The valves are held down to the bottom of the ventricles by things called chordae tendineae. So they keep the valves pulled tight downward so they don't like bulge back up into the atria, and if they did, they would not work. So if you look at this picture, there's these little white strings pulling down on the valves to keep them nice and secure in their location. That's the chordae tendineae. It keeps it from flipping or bulging back upward into the atria. If they did go that way, they wouldn't work anymore. So the AV valves are the atrioventricular valves. You have the tri and the bicuspid. I remember them because when I'm looking at a picture of the heart, I remember 3 and then 2 because I'm going to read from left to right. But just remember, When you're looking at a picture of a heart, it's mirror imaged, right? We'll always think of anatomical position as the patient's right and left, not yours. So don't get confused. That's just my way of remembering it. It's 3-2. It just goes backwards. So I know the tricuspid is on the left side of the mirror image and the bicuspid is on the right side of their mirror image. But remember, it's mirror imaged. So the left side of the mirror image is really the right side of the heart. Just remember to always put yourself in the thought process of anatomical position. It's always going to be the patient's right and left, not yours. So the next type of valves are the semilunar valves. So when the ventricles contract and they squeeze the blood up, they don't go back up into the atria because the AV valves are closed. But they do need to go out to the arteries. Okay, when they flow out into the arteries, semilunar valves keep them from flowing back down into the ventricles. So semilunar valves are in the major vessels. You have one in your pulmonary artery. So when the right ventricle contracts, it pushes blood up into the pulmonary artery, and then that pulmonary valve closes so it can't flow back. The left ventricle has the aortic valve. So when that one contracts, it pushes it up through the aortic valve, and it closes so it doesn't flow back down. The right ventricle pushes blood into the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary valve. The left ventricle goes into the aorta through the aortic valve. Their names match the vessel that they are in. So these keep blood from flowing backward into the ventricles from the great vessels. So here is a diagram that is labeled of the interior structures of the heart. Use this to label your practice diagrams for studying. This has a clear picture of everything. It's very easy to see the 4 chambers and all the vessels and what goes where. Use this for your own reference. And similarly to the last slide, here is the exterior of the heart. Use this again for your reference and for your labeling. The one thing that I want you to pay attention to is the exterior of the heart makes it a little bit harder to identify the 4 chambers. The interior, you can clearly see there are 4 compartments. You can see the top versus the bottom. Exterior makes it a little bit harder. So when you're looking at the exterior of the heart, you should be looking for these things called auricles. And if you look on this heart diagram on the left side, it's this blue flap thing that's sitting on top of the heart. That's the right auricle. That distinguishes the right atria from the right ventricle. The left side of the heart has one that looks similar, but it's red. Okay, and that is for the left atria. Below that would be the left ventricle. The auricles sit on top of the atria. Below it would be ventricle. And remember, the blue is right side because it's deoxygenated, and the red is the left side because it's oxygenated. When you're doing the visible body for this week, it's going to be really hard to identify the atria and ventricles on the external heart model. Look for the auricles. They will make it so much easier if you know what you're looking for. So recapping, we know that the atria fill, and then the blood flows through the AV valves into the ventricles. The ventricles contract, and the blood flows up through the semilunar valves and into these major vessels. So let's talk about these vessels. Okay, so let's start with the left side of the heart. The left side of the heart is part of systemic circulation, meaning it pumps oxygenated blood to the body. The major vessel that comes off the left ventricle is the aorta. It's the biggest artery in the body. Okay, so the blood is going to go through the aortic valve into the aorta, and that aorta is going to branch off into many different branches to go to all over the body. Okay, oxygenated blood. Remember, left side is always oxygenated. Okay, the blood is going to flow all through the body, drop off oxygen to the tissues. After it does its oxygen exchange in the tissues, it's going to return to the heart through veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood back to the heart. Okay, so the blood's going to come back through veins. All of those veins are going to combine into one giant vein called the vena cava. That vena cava is going to return all of that deoxygenated blood back into the heart. And remember, deoxygenated blood goes into the right side of the heart. So the vena cavas are going to bring the blood back to the right filling chamber or the right atrium. Okay, so leaves left ventricle through the aorta, goes to the body, drops off oxygen, returns through veins, eventually combining at the vena cava. And that's going to go into the right atrium because now we have deoxygenated blood. And if you look at this picture of the heart muscle around the left ventricle, you'll notice that it's really, really thick compared to the right ventricle. If you think about the purpose of the left ventricle versus the right ventricle, it might make sense why it's thicker. The right ventricle only needs to pump blood to the lungs. And lungs are really close to the heart, right? They're just to the sides. Left ventricle needs to pump everywhere, the feet, the arms, the head. So it has way more muscle because it needs to squeeze harder because it pumps to a further distance. So the left ventricle is always going to be way more muscular than any of the other chambers of the heart. So the aortic branches. I told you that the aorta comes out of the left ventricle and then it goes to the entire body. Well, it can't go to the whole body in one tube, right? So it needs to branch off into tons of littler arteries, tons of small arteries. So the main branches of the aorta are these. So the first part of the aorta that comes up out of the left ventricle is the ascending aorta. It's called ascending because it's ascending or going up. Okay, then the aorta is going to curve and go back downward. The curve is the arch, and the downward is the descending. So ascending, arch, and descending. The names pretty much match what it looks like. The descending aorta is going to go down through your abdomen and eventually split in the pelvis area to go down both legs. So that's going to supply the lower half of your body. Tons of arteries are going to branch off of the descending aorta, but that's the main part that comes off the heart that goes down is the descending. So right outside of the heart on the ascending aorta are these little teeny arteries. Those are your coronary arteries. Those are the arteries that supply blood to the heart wall or the heart muscle. Okay, so they come right off the ascending aorta immediately out of the ventricle because it's the most important thing to supply. If the heart doesn't supply itself, the heart doesn't supply anything. So the coronary arteries get supplied right away. And then at the top, there's these three little stalks. They look like it's got hair, right? So you have the brachiocephalic artery first, the left common carotid artery second, and then the left subclavian artery third. Their names kind of tell you where they're going. The brachiocephalic artery is going to split in two, okay? But if you think about brachiocephalic, arm, brachio, cephalic is head, right? So it's probably going to go to the arm and the head. Okay, so the brachiocephalic actually splits into the right subclavian and right common carotid. Okay, so the brachiocephalic supplies the right side of the body. The right subclavian means right below clavicle. So it's going to supply the arm and it's going to run below the clavicle on the right side. The right common is going to run up the right side of the neck and send blood flow to the brain. The carotid arteries run down your neck, right? The middle one is your left common carotid. It's going to go up the left side of your neck, supply your brain that way. And then the last one is the left subclavian. So it's going to go the same spot as the right subclavian, but on the left side of your body. So it's going to supply your left arm and it's going to run below your left clavicle. Okay, so this is all of the branches of the aorta. All of these are going to branch off into major vessels. And then from there, they're going to split into smaller vessels to supply all the parts that they go to. But these are the main branches that come directly off the aorta right outside of the heart. So we have talked about where blood comes out of the left ventricle through the aorta, goes to the body, and then returns to the vena cava to the right atrium. So let's talk about the other two. So the right ventricle fills from the right atrium. It squeezes and pushes blood up through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary means lungs. So this pulmonary artery carries blood away from the heart to the lungs. Okay, in the lungs, this blood's going to pick up oxygen, and then it's going to return to the heart through the pulmonary veins. But now it is oxygenated blood, so it has to go into the left side of the heart. So it's going to return through those pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Okay, so whatever side the blood comes out of, it's going to enter back into the opposite side. So right ventricle comes out, and then it returns into the left atrium. Left ventricle, it comes out, and it returns into the right atrium. So it's going to be like opposite directions, okay? And if you can't remember which way they're going, think about, is this blood oxygenated or not? If it's leaving the heart oxygenated, it has to be coming out of the left ventricle. If it's entering the heart oxygenated, it has to be coming into the left atrium. If it's leaving deoxygenated, it has to be the right ventricle. And if it's coming back in deoxygenated, it has to be the right atrium. Remember, the right side only deals with deoxygenated blood, and the left side only deals with oxygenated blood. In general, arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. There is one exception to that rule, and that is the pulmonary artery and pulmonary veins. They are the only artery and veins that are opposite of the rest. So the pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood. All of the rest of the veins will be carrying deoxygenated blood back to the vena cava. Okay, so the pulmonaries are the exception to the rule. But arteries always carry away from the heart. Arteries away, A and A. And veins always carry back to the heart. Okay, except for the oxygenated, deoxygenated thing, the pulmonaries stand out because they are opposite every other artery and vein in the body. But arteries always carry away. So I've mentioned these coronary arteries quite a few times now. Let's talk about what they are. So coronary arteries are the vessels that supply the heart wall or the heart muscle. Arteries carry away from the heart, as in the chambers. Okay, but these arteries carry away from the chambers and into the heart muscle. Okay, so the heart muscle does not get supplied oxygen from the blood flowing inside the chambers. They have their own source of supply, and that's the coronary arteries. And they have coronary veins. So the coronary arteries come right off the aorta, right outside the left ventricle, and bring blood and nutrients to the heart muscle. After everything's dropped off, they return back to the blood flow through the coronary veins, and they go back into the vena cava just like every other deoxygenated blood flowing vein, right? So the arteries bring it to the heart wall and muscle, and the veins take it away, and that's coronary. So coronary circuit pertains to supplying the heart muscle or the heart wall, it's the same thing, with blood so it can have oxygen and nutrients. So let's put all of those structures together and actually talk about how blood flows through the heart. So your ventricles are going to relax. They're nice and relaxed. It's going to allow blood to flow down into them from the atria. Okay, and remember, between the atria and the ventricles are your AV, or your atrioventricular valves, right? So blood's going to flow down into the ventricles. The ventricles are going to squeeze or contract, push blood up. Okay, the blood's not going to go back up into the atria because the valves, right? The blood's going to enter through the arteries. Okay, they're going to go through the semilunar valves and into the arteries. The semilunar valves are then going to close to keep the blood from going back into the ventricles. Okay, the blood's going to go out through the arteries and go to its location, whether it's the pulmonary artery, it's going to go to the lungs, or the aorta, it's going to go to the body, right? The blood's going to go there and either drop off or pick up oxygen, whichever side of the heart we're dealing with. After it does what it needs to, it's going to return to the heart through veins. Okay, then it's going to enter back into the atria, and it's going to start this process again. So remember, atria fill, ventricles contract. Blood enters through veins and exits through arteries. Arteries carry away, veins carry to the heart. So here is a numbered diagram of all the steps of blood through with an image that has the numbers that tell you exactly what it's talking about. So let's go through this. First, blood is going to enter the right atrium from the vena cavas, okay? So right atrium is number 1. Blood comes in from the whole body through the vena cavas, right? Deoxygenated, because we're on the right side of the heart. Atria is going to fill. Okay, then the blood is going to flow down into the right ventricle through the AV valve or the tricuspid valve, because we're on the right side of the heart. Okay, the right ventricle is going to contract, pushing the blood upward and out through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. Okay, we're still dealing with deoxygenated blood, right? We're still on the right side. The pulmonary artery is going to carry blood away from the heart to the lungs. In the lungs, gas exchange is going to happen. CO2 is going to get dropped off. Oxygen is going to get picked up. Now that blood needs to get to the body, but first it has to go back to the heart because the heart is the pump, right? So the blood is going to return through the pulmonary veins, because remember, veins come back to the heart. Come back to the heart through the pulmonary veins. The blood is now oxygenated, so it has to go into the left side of the heart. So it's going to enter the left atria. It's going to fill, because that's what atria do, right? They fill. Then the blood's going to flow through the AV valve or the mitral valve into the left ventricle. Once it gets in the left ventricle, that ventricle is going to contract, pushing the blood up through the aortic valve into the aorta. From there, the blood is going to branch into whatever vessels they go to, and it's going to go to the whole body. It's going to supply the arms, the legs, the brain, and the heart wall, right? After that, it's going to drop off its oxygen. It needs to come back to the heart because now it's deoxygenated. It needs to come back to pick up oxygen. The heart has to pump it to the lungs, right? So it's going to come back. It's going to come back through all the veins all over your body. All of those veins are going to come together at the vena cava. The vena cava is where all that deoxygenated blood gets dumped back into the heart, into the right atrium. Because it's deoxygenated, it has to go into the right side of the heart. Okay, and remember, whatever ventricle it came out of, it's going to enter the opposite atria, right? So if it came out of the left ventricle, it has to come back into the right atrium. If it came out of the right ventricle, it has to come back into the left atrium. They're always going to be opposite of each other. You can use this diagram, use these steps to help you track blood flow. Just remember that it's a circuit. Think about right, no oxygen, left has oxygen, where the right side is going versus the left side. Here is a video to give you a visual reference of blood flowing through the heart. It shows the heart contracting and where the blood goes when it contracts from each ventricle, where it fills from, all of those things. If you need more references, Visible Body also has videos, and YouTube has tons of videos.